The same religion that's capable of hideous acts of destruction can also be capable of moments of healing, of restoration, and of hope.
But educate a girl, and you educate her entire family.
There is a sun within every person.
When that anger sets in, write it. Write the letters, but don't send them. You never want to leave concrete proof of insanity.
Good morning. I'm a bit overwhelmed by and maybe intimidated by the audience that has shown up to listen to what I may have to say, hope to say to you. We are at a time in the world where we have people coming from the presidency of Iran questioning whether there was such a thing as the Holocaust. Most of us, we know that there was. The documentation is overwhelming, but we still have denials. Now, when we talk about the Holocaust, I'd like to say that everyone has his or her own Holocaust who participated in this period of Nazi atrocities. And mine is different in the sense from what you may have heard more, is that I was born into a family in Germany. And German Jews were more assimilated and integrated in the society than were the ones in Eastern Europe, which could be exterminated and were exterminated more easily because they were all clustered in one place or another. I want to start, and having said that, I may come back to the Holocaust, but that was the main distinction that I think ought to be made from the beginning. The handout gives you 3 poems, and I thought it might be helpful if I started just by reading the first one of these, because it allows me to key into this meaning of the Holocaust for the Jews in Germany. And so you can follow me, or you can just listen to me with my cracked voice, but it will be all right. The term crystal night refers to the, as I think wrote below, to the broken glass, the widespread destruction of particularly shops, and Jewish shops were rather dominant and very widely known in Germany, and they vented their first hatred right there on these shops. So, and I will briefly then explain what comes with it. So Crystal Night was that night on November 9th, and that's also why I'm doing this, because we are here on November 5th, just a little bit away from, what is it now, close to 70 years. November, fog-bound and gray the day, especially so for Jews. Shrouded in mist was the swift foray, silenced in fear the news. It happened at night, it went on by day. At dusk the brown shirts withdrew. But this single night and this one day struck like lightning out of the blue. False idols had fanned to white heat the flames of hatred and prejudice. With blaspheming lips, they called the games that sundered our families. The mothers screamed, the children whined, as husbands, as fathers, were bound and led from their homes, leaving behind lives built on familiar ground. While headlines blared and radios blared to justify violence, husbands and fathers were herded, dehaired behind Dachau's barbed wire fence. How many Aryans closed their eyes? Did winter's fog hide the theft? Mothers and children raised unheard cries in Jewish homes, men bereft. I was about 10 and a half years old at that time, and in a family of 6, well, at that time there were 4 children, yes, 5 children in my family. A girl had been born earlier in April, and there were 4 boys of us in the family. And, well, it was the most horrifying moment of my life up to that point, all our lives, I guess. We were living in an apartment on the street level, and we were just really waiting to sit down to dinner when we heard these footsteps, these boots going upstairs, because there were a number of Jewish families in the city of Cologne, which is where we were living then, and waited until they came down and slammed on our doors and just came in with guns, revolvers in hand and sticks in hand, and ran right into the rooms and confronted my grandmother, who was living with us, and my parents, of course, and we children were cowering in the side in the living room, well, just scared, I suppose. So, just to describe that night further, they investigated my family's records as far as being German was concerned, and of course my grandmother had lost a son in the First World War, and he had been decorated. My father had been fighting in the war and had been in French captivity, and somehow or other they left us alone without my father being taken. But the key event of that period was unauthorized or sudden arrest without any reason. Why would people get arrested and taken away? And that's what happened on that day throughout Germany. Now, the reason for that was, of course, and that now goes back to the history a little bit earlier. There had been an influx of Jews from Poland and other areas in Europe into Germany, because apparently the economy was getting better in Germany and opportunities were there. And being not German by birth, these people were the first on whom the Nazis decided to vent their hatred. And so they had grabbed those that they could, and many of them, and had interned them some months earlier in 1938, interned them on the Polish border, sort of under very miserable conditions. And one of the boys from those families who had been studying in France had just received a letter or some other communication from his parents on the conditions in those internment camps, and took it into his mind to take or buy a gun and go and shoot the attaché of the consulate of Germany in Paris. That being done, it was immediately used as a pretext for this Crystal Night. And, well, the poor fellow was, of course, arrested and tried, but the Germans made out of this a conspiracy of Jews with the plutocrats of Britain and England and America and other places, and of the Bolsheviks, which they had linked all together. So that was the event that happened in Germany. Now, in 1938, Hitler was just happy to annex Austria, which is, of course, his homeland. As you all know, Hitler is not a genuine German, as the Germans were there, but is an Austrian who wanted to be a super German. So they took this pretext and they mounted this first great action in Germany. When maybe I just go back a little bit just to say that my father had originally been in a village. He had been a broker of real estate in the village and a merchant, grain merchant. We had a big silo and a big grain warehouse on our lot where we lived. And in 1935, the Nazis decided to start their Aryanation ideas and passed laws restricting Jews. And the first thing they restricted was land can only be held by German Aryans. No others can have it. So my father lost that, and then grain was the next thing that they similarly said they couldn't be used, so he had to sell his house and his business at a great loss, or total loss. I was too young to know. And in fact, to a Dutchman, a Hollander, had to come in because Germans were afraid to deal with him directly, Germans in the village. We moved to Cologne at that point, and that's why we were in Cologne when this thing was happening. And my purpose in saying all of this is that the perspective from a German Jewish family is totally different from that of a Eastern European Jewish family, where the bulk of the victims come from, because I imagine it's between 5 and 6 million Jews from east of Germany proper died in the Holocaust, whereas Germany only had 600,000, and the rest of the Europe that came under Nazi domination had perhaps the other 400,000 that came from France, Italy, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and well, that's about it, Belgium and Holland and the Netherlands. So, having said that, this just sets the stage for you that what it was for me when we were living in Cologne. Persecution had begun fairly early. Jews were not allowed to attend regular schools. And so another reason for going to Cologne was that there was a school for Jews at the time, a recognized state school for Jews, which I then attended. And yes, sir.
I have a question.
Please.
Could you explain oh, you want to get mic? Okay. Sorry. Yes, my question has to do with why the local Germans were afraid to purchase your father's land or possessions or what have you, whereas a Dutch person became the owner?
The reason is that the local population were afraid to deal with him because it would look like they were doing us a favor. At that point, the hysteria was such that anybody who was even remotely sympathetic, openly, business is an open matter, is subject to reprisals of one sort or another.
Thank you.
And I'd like to say, just for I started to talk about the kind of persecution there was, not being able to go to the school, then there is nothing as serious, as deadly in the way of propaganda as to get hold of the children, and that's what Hitler did, and his henchmen they did. They established the Hitler Youth, and those turned into real monsters very soon. And in Cologne, right about a half a block away from us, there was a big Jewish head with exaggerated nose and cheeks and jowls and whatnot. And under it was just written, "The enemy." Right? Daily, the radio was not doing anything but going against Jewish, anti-Jewish propaganda and hinting at conspiracies to bring down the government and whatnot. So it is a mass hysteria brought up and supported by the Hitler youth, the young people, who went and informed on their parents if the parents were found to be, or known to them to be in any way kind to Jews or friendly or anything else. So almost immediately after 1935, that was gone. The German populace was on a mass hysteria and on a mass control. 99% votes for Hitler and his party, of course, and all of these things, because people by that time already were afraid of the consequences. And the brown shirts, which were the agents of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP, which they were rowdies, actually. They were bullies and whatnot. They were the lowest kind of the people, but they were also at the same time the one that are willing to use force at the slightest provocation. And they were very happy to do this job on November 8, 1938. The other thing which you would really want to think about is that German Jews were on the whole relatively well off. You found the lawyers, the doctors, the bankers, Rothschild, the industry, even ThyssenKrupp, and were all capitalized by Jewish people and so. So it wasn't a very difficult thing for the propaganda machine of Dr. Goebbels to get the Germans to realize that if they could take over whatever the Jews had, it was going to give it to them free, and the government took the rest and used it for their defense or war machines. So all in all, the Germans were, I think, very happy to see this development. And so that's part of the situation. So while we had this kind of persecution going on, especially on the Hitler youth, they were always lying in wait for us boys. Since in 1939, we had to begin wearing the Jewish star with the word Jew written in German, written right across the yellow star with the black lines on the outside, which you have all seen in other places on the Holocaust. And they were just waiting and lying there and throwing stones at us and sticks at us, and certainly yelling at us they're calling us all kinds of epithets. And so that was, but it's minor. Sticks and stones may break my bones, which I don't want them to do, but words will never hurt me. But so, anyhow, so that was the situation in Germany until 1939, when they went into Poland. And with that, from that moment on, the situation changed entirely, and they decided that, well, this is not Germany, this is not coming back to Germany, there is nothing really so bad. And they started the extermination of Jews in Poland, followed by Russia when they invaded Russia, once Russia turned against Germany. And there were about, I would guess, between 6 and 8 million Jewish people living in that area alone, and then later in Hungary and so on. So these were simpler because in most cases the Jews were concentrated, and they could be identified and could be isolated and could be grabbed and brought wherever they wanted to do and kill them. And the killing was in many different ways, which I'd like to discuss in a moment briefly. But initially it was just shooting or mostly shooting, and burial, open burial, mass graves and whatnot. But then they went into scientific methods, and they developed this Cyclone B, cyanide-type gas that they used extensively in Auschwitz and elsewhere, not just in gas chambers, but in improvised places, large trucks that they specially constructed or had, or any kind of a building that they could make airtight, more or less, and was used widely, very widely used. So that's 39. This came Poland. That was the war, started the war for us in Europe. And in Germany, actually, nothing much changed until 1940, 41, when, in the meantime, I guess they got the lists together, and then they started pulling people from all parts of Germany and sent them on what we call a transport or, deportation. And initially, these transportations were to camps in Germany, big camps like names you've heard, Bergen-Belsen, Sachsenhausen, and a few Dachau was one of them also, but a smaller one actually. And initially these people, let me go back to Dachau for a moment just to say the people who came on November 9th and 10th to Dachau were taken there, or to Sachsenhausen, or to one of the other camps. They were let go after about 6 or 7 weeks, and they were let go with the instruction, get out of Germany at once. They were given 48 hours to leave Germany. They came back. They told some people, but it is an amazing thing that when you don't want to hear something or when you don't want to believe something, it just didn't raise enough fear or anguish about this thing. And they said, oh, well, you go, nothing will happen to us here. There are too many, we have too many friends and too many people that know us, and it's too open. They can't just do and go about murdering people. So that's one of the unfortunate things, which is probably true of every time when you are in a situation where you have things to lose and where you believe that you are in a fairly safe position. You don't want to hear the worst thing that's possible. But these people knew, and these people got out. And some of their relatives got out with them. But on the whole, very little was possible. The other thing that was against immigration is that the rest of the world was also not aware, not listening. And as you well know, Mr. Chamberlain went to Nuremberg, to Munich, and appeased Hitler, and others did the same. I mean, after all, Hitler was building a German army against the regulations and dictates from Versailles Treaty, and he was building an industry, a war industry, and nobody did anything about it. And people were not anxious to take people who were just running away. And so the United States had a quota system, and I remember that my father had applied rather too late in probably 1938, and they had a number 15,000 and something, and it was moving by the thousands per year. So it would have been 1944 or 45 before he could have emigrated to the United States. So things were not helpful on the European scene. They left him to do what evil he wanted to do, and he did it. And then, so he went about doing it. So while the extermination in Eastern Europe was fairly rapid and fairly brutal and fairly substantial, in Germany we didn't know about it either, that what was happening. And no one really knew what was happening beyond the borders in Poland and in Russia afterwards. And so in the 1940-41, they started to round up Jewish people in the villages in the city and putting them on transport. This was euphemistically called resettlement. You're going to resettlement to Eastern countries, you work and you'll be doing fine. You'll be given land, you'll be given opportunities to work, etc. It all sounded innocuous almost. And as turns out later, which I'd of course, and nobody I think, we didn't know, but my parents may have known, we had to pay for our own transport. We paid for our own tickets on these railroad cars, which were either freight cars or very down-out passenger cars. And so my father had three sisters, each of whom had 5 or 6 children, and his mother and 2 unmarried sisters. And over the period 40 to 41 and early 42, they all went on different transports to Riga in Latvia, Litzmannstadt, or as it's now called Lodz in Poland, Lublin in Poland, and a few to Theresienstadt. And that was the fact that my father, as well as my 2 older brothers, and ultimately at age 14 also myself, were working in war-related industries, that we were among the last to get out of Cologne. None of these other people have ever been coming back. I might as well say offhand that out of the 9 of us who went, just myself and 1 brother survived. The rest also perished in various places, including my mother and the 3 younger children, younger than myself, in Auschwitz in the gas chambers. So that's the way the situation was in Germany. So they emptied the German Jews and they confiscated their belongings. And from then on, the story comes back to just the story of the camps. And one of the reasons for survival, you know, I must say right off the bat, and I'm sure everyone else has said similarly, survival has been mostly luck. There's not much that anyone could do. Those people who were not immediately selected to go to gas chambers or other means of immediate death were used as workers somewhere, and they usually knew very little about what was happening in camps like Auschwitz. It was a central unit place where they came and then were farmed out again to factories nearby and even farther away and even back into Germany. So now I want to talk briefly about the next step from us was on July 27, 1942, we went into the trains and went to Theresienstadt, or the city of Teresa, who was an empress of Austria, in northern Czechoslovakia. And that was a ghetto. And we were just lucky to be winding up there rather than in some of the other camps that were straight extermination camps, and to stay there for a while, or otherwise I would not be alive for sure. It was a camp, a garrison city, old buildings, but you know, it used to be the cavalry used to be there. They had stables there, and all of this was converted to housing. And life was relatively simple. You were just confined, and you were under a Jewish administration, and you never saw a single uniformed SS man or soldier inside the ghetto. The only problem was food, limited, very limited, but still survival was possible. And there were no medications, although the best doctors of Europe were all there, but they had nothing to work with except a little rubbing alcohol and their scalpels and their tools, but no medications, nothing else that's available. So under these conditions, my grandmother died in 1943, about a year after we arrived there. We were all separated. My mother and father did stay together, and with the much younger children. The three of us who were between the ages of 14, 15, and 18, I guess, were put into what they call the youth building, where we lived on simple beds, nothing very fancy, mostly boards, but no mattresses or anything. But you get used to it. Young persons get used to it. And so we didn't suffer greatly in that ghetto. And my oldest brother was even working in one of the kitchens and occasionally supplied my parents and us with an extra ration of something or something. Well, what was the ration? We might be interested to know. The ration was not very much different from what we got later, except we got used to get more. A small loaf of bread in the morning and a small loaf of bread at night, and the soup at noontime, which still was reasonably full of stuff, sometimes sausage, but most of the time just beets and potatoes and similar ingredients. And coffee we got, which was actually very important. Chicory coffee, but coffee. And so that was in the morning, and at noontime the soup, and at nighttime another loaf and coffee. And some margarine. Yes, ma'am.
What was your sensibility? You were how old when you went? I'm sorry, when you went to
Theresienstadt.
yes.
Yeah, well, I was 14.
And was it terrifying all the time? Were you anxious where your parents were? Did you accept that this was going on
Well,
and
you
would get
accepted it
together?
because it was day after day the same thing, and nothing, in front of your eyes, nothing dreadful happened. The old and the weak were dying because they didn't get their attention, medical attention, they didn't get their food that they needed. Insulin was not available, for example. My grandmother was insulin dependent. And so these things happened, but you took those in stride, okay? And it was months after all. We came in July of, or practically August 42, and we left to go to Auschwitz in March of 44. That's quite a long time, and that's one of the reasons for survival. By the time we went to Auschwitz, I was 16, so it's already a difference. And while I lost some weight and some skeletal muscle and whatnot, but I did not feel physically very bad. The schooling went on in some ways. We had enough people that were qualified to do that, so we carried on something equivalent to schools inside these youth homes. And we even had some limited sports, gymnastics and stuff every day, which was always good. And the time went. So I don't want to dwell on that because it was an unusual set of places, and a unusual place. What should have given us pause, though, was that being in Czechoslovakia, it was also the central point through which all of the Czech Jews were passed, and they were coming in, and within 2 or 3 weeks they were going on to Auschwitz and other places. But those people that had come earlier, these, let's say, doctors and higher level people, or people who had been deferred for some reason or other, they were left in peace generally, and I would say that the mortality rate probably was only about 3%, somewhere around there, normally. And nothing from violence, or almost nothing from violence. The ghetto was established to allow visits by Red Cross and Danish. The Danes particularly were very active in trying to see what was happening and to help, surprisingly, but they are very courageous people, apparently. And some came, not too often, but some came and were satisfied. And the Germans were happy they could show them this place, right? So, but ultimately we were then transported to Auschwitz, and then of course it was a different life. The trains were cattle trains by that time, although we were told that we can take a suitcase. We took suitcases. And as soon as you arrived, of course, the situation was entirely different. You were rushed or torn out of the cars and lined up on the ramp, immediately on the ramp. Separation was immediate as well. Women to one side, with children one side, men on the other side. And, there was no time to say goodbye. And my father and my mother had a very quick embrace, and that was the end of that. And this was, however, again, it was done that way, but it was not done in the sense of bringing everybody to the gas chamber. This is an accident. Again, they had set up one camp in Auschwitz, Camp B, for people from that ghetto, and the previous transport was already there, and all of us came alive from this train into that camp. It was still somewhat wintry in Poland. It was not very pleasant, and it felt very ominous, and we already could see at that time the flames from the crematorium, but we didn't know what it was, except the smell was a bit highly unusual, and that's something else you don't really get used to, but there it was, okay? And so we were in that camp for about 4 weeks or 5 weeks, getting rations, not too much different from those in the ghetto, but a little weaker in most ways. And then one day, and we were keeping our clothes and our hair and everything else. Then one day, and we saw, of course, that the neighboring camps, they all wore their blue and white striped prison uniforms and had no hair on their head. So, but on one day it came then that they gave us our numbers. We got numbers in a new cycle. 200,000 people had been numbered before, and they decided to give us an A cycle, so we have very low A numbers. We were the first ones with A. After that came B numbers. All of them went up to about 200,000. And those apparently or initially were designed to provide the workforce, of course. So then they started to take people, able people, men mostly, out for work, for assignment to work, and they went out of the camp, and everyone went out of the camp except mothers and children and old people and all those that were clearly not able to work. And again, as I said, it's luck and some unfathomable decision by a very famous gentleman from the German medical staff, Dr. Joseph Mengele. He decided, and as he conducted experiments with many people, that he would come and take out about 100 young men, and that age about 14 to 16, 17. And so we were selected upon careful scrutiny by Dr. Mengele of our naked bodies, we were selected to go to the only camp in Birkenau that was actually servicing all the activities that were going on there, including the gas chambers, the crematoria, the arrival of the people that came in, the sorting of the goods, pulling out of the gold teeth out of mouths and whatnot. All of these things were done by people in that camp. They had different functions dealing with the upkeep of that extermination operation camp, the whole camp. And then the transports kept arriving one by one. We were assigned a hay wagon detail. We were given 3 or 4 hay wagons, I don't remember, I think it's 3. And we used these to bring stones and goods and various other things from our camp or pick them up somewhere else. And we had work to do every day, and when we didn't have work to do every day, we were just sent out to do work to some spot outside the camp and pick up stones or pick up soil or whatever there was to do. But we weren't really forced to very hard labor. The thing was, though, that we were quartered in the penal unit in the camp that held the what they called criminals. Anybody who was there who made an attempt to escape, or who offended an SS officer, or who had been found with lice or with some kind of improper clothing and whatnot, spoiled clothing and whatnot. These things were all regimented very strongly. So we saw in that environment, we were put under the tutelage of the leader of that camp, of that block, who was a German from the Sudetenland, which is a part of Czechoslovakia, which the Germans claimed to be their German heritage. So we were there, and we saw a lot of hangings. We saw a lot of killing by caning. We underwent also, we were not spared the canes either if one of us had something wrong. And I at one point had 15, and I felt those for about a month. And a special instrument in which you put your feet in there, you know. And once they were in there, they were stuck, and then you stretch you out with your hands. Somebody pulled them from the other side, and another, usually one of the people who worked inside the stable or block, whatever you want to call that, and who were entitled to chase us or to do anything with us that they had to. It wasn't an easy life, but we were, again, day by day, what was going on. The only difference is that now we came under the regular regulation of the selections, because there were regularly held selections by the SS of people who looked emaciated, or who, again, as I said, lice was a major problem, but you couldn't have any. How it was possible not to have any, but you couldn't have any when they came. And so that was there always with us. And of course, we always had the smell of human blood in our nostrils, and the thought that and I maybe want to read that as one of the other poems that you can follow along. I'll just introduce you with the first 2 stanzas, what lilies are normally like. Out there, proud heads held upright, lilies bloom in soft dew splendor, dew pearl, leaving moonlit night, kissing dawn in moist surrender. Like a goblet, upward reaching, petals gather starlight pure, tears of joy and of beseeching, salt the sweet of love's allure. Not in here does earth yield flowers, no. We make the lilies bloom out of bodies that were ours ere we reached this place of doom. Flesh and bone and blood and fire mixed to form our lilies red, spewing forth from every spire, herds of humans, slaughtered, dead. Night on night, death blows the lily, warning us who yet can see, threatening that, will ye, nil ye, here you too shall cease to be. And that's a kind of a thing that you carry with you most of your life, of course, but it's something that you don't easily forget, that smell, the nights of these crematorium blowing away. Now, I wanted to say one thing more, and that's this maybe most important, that came to my being in Auschwitz, and that is that the dehumanization is the most critical thing that the Germans did. And it is probably the same, if I make the analogy for slaughtering of cattle, we do it, I guess, in the same way. The persons in the camps, number one, became numbers. They had no individuality. They had no reading material, they had no leisure, they had no nothing. Maybe I was luckier than others. I had memorized a great deal of things, among others, the entire largest German piece of classical work, the Faust by Goethe. And so I was reciting that pretty regularly to myself as a means of resistance, if you like. But most others didn't have that. So you were just a number, and you were looked upon from the outside by the SS and by the people who, SS incidentally, were not all Germans. The worst of these came from other countries, and they picked, of course, the best kind of people. Latvia is one of the main suppliers of these people. Some from Germany, of course, also, but Latvia and Ukraine, even once they conquered Ukraine, there were a lot of Ukrainians. In this camp, in the penal colony, I found about 10 or 15 Russians, Cossacks, who introduced me to the songs of the Cossacks, and who occasionally would sing the Internationale, the song of communism, more or less. But they were the remnants of thousands and thousands of Russians who were brought there and just didn't survive. They were just the last few. And most of them wound up in the penal colony for some reason. Next to us, in the barracks next to us, with an adjoining wall, was the Sonderkommando, the people who had charge of the gas chambers and the crematoriums. There was no communication whatever with them. They were held in strict confinement. They were largely or mostly Polish Jews, strong young men, and who were regularly, about 6 weeks, exterminated themselves and replaced by another set. We knew this, not myself, but the knowledge came through from the Polish Jews that were there, or Poles that were there actually, who had contact with them by sounds, by things that they managed to do. But we only knew it, and there was no other contact with them. We saw these people marching out and marching in the morning and at night, and that's it. So that's not a very nice life either. However, out of that came in October of 44. So I'm arriving in March of 44, so I stayed there until January 45. Wait a moment. I stayed there until end of October 44. At the end of October, just before we were taken out of the camp, there was a revolt of those people, and they did disable one of the crematoria, and they did kill, I guess, a number of the SS and other people. But ultimately, only about 40 of what was perhaps 500 people got away, and the rest were captured, hanged, shot, whatever. So this was an experience, again, day by day, and I want to stress the point that you no longer felt an individual, a human. You're just part of a mass that had to behave the way the master race wanted it. And so we went and we had our job to do, and we did get into other camps. We saw the Hungarians arrive and being killed and sent away. We had another camp, one's farther away removed from us, where the gypsies were confined. The Germans, the German Aryan master race concept disliked everything that was not pure, and I don't know, they didn't know enough about genetics then, but apparently they used it anyhow. So gypsies and homosexuals and handicapped people in any way, they were just taken and thrown into the camps without regard, and they were not Jewish, and there were lots of people that were not Jewish in the camps, especially from Poland. Again, there was an underground. Anyone getting caught would get there. So we had a very mixed population from all over Europe, but the dominant victims were Jews at that moment, at least, because they were being herded into this situation and exterminated as fast as they could, or sent out to camps. Now, I guess the supply of labor from this source was getting low, so they collected people from Auschwitz to go on transport because the Russians were coming. That was towards the end of 44. The Russians were maybe 200 miles away. About 20 of us boys were going into a work camp, so I experienced that as well. In Sosnowitz, there's a city not far from about maybe 30, 40 miles away from Auschwitz, where I was put under the charge of a Polish specialist making the barrels for cannons on a lathe. Dangerous work, because if you made a mistake, you were dead, of course. And next to us was another group that was making munitions of sorts. It wasn't too long, but again, this was something that you just went along, and you actually got a little more food than you did in Auschwitz proper, because they did want some effort out of you. And then the Russians came closer, and they decided, okay, to close Auschwitz, that camp, that main camp. All of the other camps had already been closed. And we were asked, the 100 boys were asked to, okay? Thanks, okay, thanks. And I volunteered as a carpenter. Actually, I had welding experience, but I didn't want to really do that work. So I said I was a carpenter in my previous incarnation. And about 20 of us went to this other camp. Then the Russians were coming, and we were 900 in that camp, and we were marched through the countryside in January. snow, of course, snow and ice and snowing all the time. And that was one of the marches. My march started with 900 people, and we arrived with 200 in northern Czechoslovakia, where we were put into trains and went to a concentration camp in Austria called Mauthausen. And this, again, like Auschwitz, was a collection point. Only they were not really set up for extermination. They're just set up for work. And I worked there for from 4 months, 3-4 months, in a blind tunnel on a machine, making revolver, the shapes for the revolvers. 12 hours, night shift or day shift. And it was at this point that I became really emaciated and, well, just carried myself to work and from work, and nothing left. There was not much left of me. I'm describing the march here, and that's the third unit there. And I might as well get you the feel of that. In those 12 days, as I said, we lost 700 people. And I was very close to losing myself. We were marching during the night, and one or another person was usually getting to the point where they fall by the wayside. Then somebody comes and helps and pops you up between two people and keeps you marching. So march on, brother, march on. You know, that's what that was about. One shoe in the hand, freezing wet, the other ice bound to his skin. The wind blew the cap off his head, scraped open and raw his shin. March on, brother, march on. From hunger the stomach is growling, 4 days on the march without food, and ever the shots and the howling of orders. Up, march, or I'll shoot. March on, brother, march on. You will be next, brother. Look, pistols drawn, and an SS man is coming your way. So in line, brother, stifle that yawn, or you won't see another day. March on, brother, march on. Look left, where the corpses are coiled in the grip of the death-dealing blow. Look right, where blood steams as if boiled toward the sky from the frozen snow. March on, brother, march on. Trust the end nears, that peace follows swift, bringing blessings to soothe your pain. Don't give up now. Will yourself to lift your feet to see freedom again. Ultimately, that was the main hope that kept most of us alive, that we might overcome and survive to the point where there was no more enslavement. So that was in Mauthausen, and in Gusen, one of the camps there, where I was in these blind tunnels working. And on the 5th of May, 1945, the advanced armored divisions of Patton's army came to liberate us. So I was liberated in Austria near the city of Linz, the place where Hitler was born and grew up.
The same